Slight technical problems tonight. I hope you like looking at the image of Seth, which is a rather nice one from Gurna. Okay, well, one of my computers has just blown up, so I won't be able to show you the pictures live, but if you tune in later to the recorded version of this, you will see some of the pictures that I'm going to talk about, and I'll show you them, but it won't be in full technical until a bit later. I hope the sound is okay. If not, maybe someone nice person out there can tell me. Welcome everybody to recording the live feed for the Companions of Seth, which is going to be a regular feature. I don't know quite where we're going to go with it. Who knows? We may even have some guests on here one day. The studio, as you can see, is still a little bit ramshackle at the moment, but we're gradually getting it fixed up and whatever. Anyway, so for this, what I did last time, I talked about Heka and Magick and some rather interesting things which you can see online, and I'm going to pick up from something. I finished off talking about a thing called the breath of life. Someone said they liked the playlist. That's kind of cool. I'll tell you about that maybe on the live feed. The breath of life, and I talked about the kind of power, the underlying power that Egyptian magicians, of which Sethians are kind of quite an important part, the power that they manipulate in their magical work, which is called the breath of life, or the Ak. So that's where we left it off, which is essentially a kind of amoral, effective power, which everybody seems to be able to have used in ancient Egypt, regardless of status. As I say, whether you were gods, men, everybody really, a king, a priest, even a criminal, are all subject to the same force, and they all use the same force. Usually, even your enemies can use the same force. So it's like a force of nature, really, the power of the breath of life. Okay, so I want to go into that a little bit further, and hopefully finish the second half of this lecture so I can move on to another subject next time. So as I say, whether it's good or bad, whatever your intentions in ancient magic, whether you're after a good thing or a bad thing, we could discuss what that might be. It always involved the manipulation of this energy, and it's the same energy of force that is used by the creator gods in Egypt as well. So it's the kind of real stuff, if you like. Now the word Ak, which you could spell A-K-H, Ak, or just A-K if you like. I'll put this up later. You could almost translate that as spell as well, you know, as in the sense of magical spell, as in words or utterances that have this manipulate this power. And of course that's a kind of very Egyptian thing. It can sometimes also be seen personified as a spirit, almost like a ghost, really. Some people don't agree with this, but most of the academic stuff, and it seems obvious when you look at the text, that it's almost like a ghost or a spirit that people, or a thought form really, and it survives in the magical tradition in the Islamic world in a thing called the jinn as well. The jinn, of which one of the most powerful of the jinn is actually called an Egyptian jinn anyway. So there are numerous citations for this. So whatever comes out of the mouth, so that's also the association with the breath of life. So Isis is a quote: Isis rebels the deeds of the enchanters, that's other magicians really, other magicians or witches, by the spells uttered from her mouth. So these are kind of core things really, the breath, the mouth. So, which is why reasonable why it's to call the act the breath of life. If you're familiar, I mean, most of the magic community, I hope the sound is coming over all right. Just let me know. And if there's anything I kind of say that really doesn't make sense, you could put that as a comment as well, and I can reflect upon it. Or if you've got an interesting aside, I can maybe add that into the discussion. So there's a little bit of interactive stuff here. Someone's put a heart up, so I presume that means the sound's not so bad. Now, obviously, I'm talking about the very oldest strata of Egyptian magical practice, right back before, even before the building of the pyramids, even before when the Egyptians were a kind of tribal group moving in the desert, really. Obviously, if you come back forward, right, on the timeline, you get to a thing called the PGM, or the Greek Magical Papyri, which the magical community is really, really interested in at the moment, and has kind of rediscovered and is using these. And there are lots of Setian spells as well in that collection that Setians are working on. And there's one interesting one which we came across in the an Egyptian magical book called the 8th Book of Moses. Now, of course, there are 5 books of Moses, but I don't know what happened to 6 and 7. I think they start at number 8. 8 is probably symbolic then. But in that spell, if you look it up later, you'll find there's also an occurrence of invocation of the 7 acts, the 7 breaths, if you like, or sometimes it's written as the 7 cars, but it's the same. Essentially, it's the same word they're talking about, ak, and the God who creates. So if he has 7 of things, he creates by laughing 7 times, right, or 7-fold laugh, which is, again, these are very primeval, interesting techniques of magic, really. So laughing if is a breath, isn't it? Laughing essentially is a very strange thing that we do, right? That involves some sort of weird thing we do with our breath. I mean, I know the Chaos Magicians actually gone a bit further. They use laughing as a form of banishing, even, and in a way they're absolutely on the money there. They're in touch with quite an ancient tradition of magic, really, this the notion of the laugh, which we take for granted. You know, we've kind of got used to it in a certain way, but there's a kind of magical element to laughing. It's quite a magical thing to do, the manipulation of the breath. So you're giving life again through the breath. I'll read you the bit. It says, so saying, he clapped 3 times, right, the magician, and the god laughed. The god laughed 7 times. And then it gives you the laughs, you know, and it's, I'm not going to try and do this, but it just says, I suppose it would be ha, 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 you know, but it's written as ka, 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 which is laughing. The gods laugh. 7 gods, and 7 gods were born on each laugh. And they encompass the whole universe. So when he laughed, light radiance appeared, irradiated everywhere, and became God over the universe and fire. And so it goes on. It's almost like a cosmological text, this. So it's saying that creation, the process of creation, was a kind of cosmic joke, really. Was a process in which the God laughed 7 times. And each time he laughed, so he laughed a second time. I mean, this is like 7 laughs, 7 days, you see. It tells you where a lot of these myths come from, really. He laughed a second time, and all the water, the earth, hearing the sound, cried out and heaved, and the water came to be divided into 3 parts. And a god appeared, and he gave charge of the abyss of the primal waters, for without moisture, neither increase nor diminishing is possible. And then it goes on, when he laughed a 3rd time, the process of mind appeared, holding a heart. Because of the sharpness of the gods, he's called Hermes. So you sort of, I mean, there's a very old strata of belief that you will find in Egypt, and you'll find almost everywhere. You'll certainly find it there are mantras in Hinduism which deal with the power of laughter in a way, or laughter, the primary joke. There's even a goddess for this. So I thought do check that out. The 8th Book of Moses in the PGM. It's a very, very long book. It's almost like a magical book in its own right, and I'm just reading you one very interesting section of it in which it seems to tell us how the world was created. On God laughed the seventh time, and the soul came into being and wept while laughing. This is, again, rather poignant, really. So it's quite a... So, anyway, going back to the acts, which is related to this process, right? This primary expressive thing that we do, our intuitive power, if you like, of the body. It's the force, as I say, through which, as we just learned, the Creator creates and sustains the cosmos itself. It's necessarily the dynamic energy which Egyptian religious ritual sought to channel. It tries to channel this in order to preserve the universe, really, I suppose, which is one aspect of magic. So magic all breaks down to the manipulation of the breath of life. That's, you can think of lots, when you know that, right, that's a fundamental Egyptian idea. You could probably think of other traditions which add even more to that, this idea of the breath of life, of prana, if you like, from the Hindu tradition. Using the breath to produce special archaic sounds, which is the secret of magic, right? That we learn sometimes from other people, but sometimes we just strictly speaking, it's already in us somewhere. It's just a matter of working out how to express that. So in a cult, in a religious cult in ancient Egypt, and this is the kind of thing we might do, then, so I'm just looking at some of the people. Welcome, Carly. A cult would be manipulating the energy as a group by recitation and by kind of the ritual substances that you have in a group ritual, and by a kind of system of practical theology, really, or a theurgy, as sometimes it's called, where the priest, really, you're performing the actions of God, with, not to sound too pretentious about it. As it says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall be God, which is a kind of another way of looking at it. Pure of heart, you see. If you're pure of heart and you breathe in this kind of unrestricted way, then the magic flows. So priest, priestess and practitioners, they kind of can all come together in the same individual, really. You probably know, right, or probably worked out by now, or enough people have written about this, that there were very few actual permanent priests in ancient Egypt. Even when Egypt was kind of in its, mega time and everything, its zenith, if you like. Everybody seems to have a go at this. I mean, I think there probably are some permanent priests, but given how much work there is to do, everybody seems to have a go. Everybody of a certain social class, anyway, who can, has got spare time, or is well thought of member of the community. There's a kind of rota, and that's a kind of good idea as well, really. We can learn a lot from the idea. Well, that is the pagan point of view. Be your own priest. You don't really want these permanent class of priests laying down the law. In some ways you want to do it. So as times got hard in Egypt, it's even more true, really. They didn't pay priests at all then. So I say, to experience as a priest, especially if one was a more literate variety, at least it gave you, if it didn't give you any money, it gave you access to knowledge. It gave you not access to the special place in the temple where the magical books were kept. The magical scrolls, the temple scriptorium, which is known as the House of Life, for obvious reasons. And so it's often the case, because I think because the priests were short of money, or maybe this is just the way it is. Maybe this is the way magical work really is. The priests do one thing in the temple itself, and they do something often diametrically opposite to that outside. So they have a day job, maybe as a priest, where they perform something like the wax image spell, which we talked about last time, which is the well-known witch's wax image spell, which originates in ancient Egypt, or certainly is a very old version of that in ancient Egypt, and they perform the wax image spell virtually in every temple every day, sometimes more than once a day, in which they personified really the enemies of Egypt. So they're kind of sticking it, and they had a lot of enemies, so they did that. But so the priest is doing that with a wax spell and doing that against a personification of evil called either Seth, as we know in later times, being Sethians, as the scapegoat, or as a Pep or a Apophis. So they're sticking, but the weird thing is, then they go home at night and they have a private job then, and the private job will be in return for money usually. They use the kind of same techniques of but basically sending what's called evil sleep, which is they use this magical power, they manipulate this power to send the act, that personified as a thought form, and they'll send that to prey on someone in their sleep. Now that's quite nasty in a way, but so we can learn a lot of therapeutic stuff from this as well. You don't have to look at it in the nasty sense, although I know some people are not going to be so bothered about that, but it is weird how a priest, the same person, is doing both things. They're twisting the ritual, if you like, not perverting it. They know what they're doing. They're just using it in a different way in a private matter to because someone said they want to send evil sleep to a neighbour, usually because they're enemies. So we're sort of coming back to the act, right? The personification of the breath of life. Let's say if you read accounts of Egyptian dreams and nightmares, especially nightmares, you realise they consider the dream world to be real, and as the real theatre of magic. It's where most Egyptian magic actually occurs, and it took us a long time, I think, in the West to rediscover that. We're trying to kind of, in popular culture, the magic is something that occurs almost in waking consciousness. They don't always refer you to the dream world. So it's not that we need to be trying to send evil sleep. It's just one of the range of techniques that happen to be there in our history, and it is possible to use the same technique, as I say, for therapy, and it's quite it's probably the function of the temple. The function of the Egyptian temple is a incubation chamber, and people did used to go to and sleep in the temples. They still do, in fact, I know, but certainly in ancient times people went to the temples to sleep and to have a dream incubated for them. It might be for initiation. That's how you're initiated into a mystery cult in the ancient world, is via the dream world, and I described that in some detail in my book Isis in India, if you want an account of the use of drugs and dreams in temples as a form of initiation is there. But usually people went for some sort of answers to their problems which they would get from the world of dreams, and as one of the things that a magical practitioner should be able to do is interpret dreams, something certainly I do, and there are very ancient books survived from ancient Egypt that tell us how to interpret dreams, which should be rediscovered and brought back to life. And in magic, put simply, if you do an invocation to a particular god and you want them to appear visibly to you, then they're going to really appear visibly to you first of all, in the dream world. It then may have an effect in the physical world because the two worlds are interlocked. So I'd refer you then to the stories which most Setians probably know now of Kenwa Set, who was a vizier in ancient Egypt in the kind of 19th dynasty, and you can read his stories of dream interpretations and the whole adventures that happened to him in dreams. That's a really good source for magic. So I wanted to finish as well about the act. I just say that I didn't manage one of the pictures I was going to show. In the book Supernatural Assault. See, the ack is also a bird. That's the strange thing, right? You see that? It's in black and white. It's a kind of bird. A crested ibis. A crested ibis which makes the sound. It makes the sound ack, so it's called the ack. See, look, that's the hieroglyph. So these are... We're talking about magic now that people did in their... Not in the temple as well, in their homes. What did they have in their homes? And we know this because they found it. So this rather strange image, which some people don't even think is Egyptian at all when they see it. I'll put the colour version on it. I think it's a few what's it, about 15-20 centimetres high. So it's a very personal, small image that you might have on your mantelpiece. Assuming they had mantelpieces. All right, maybe they didn't have mantelpieces, but they had a little kind of shelf with the household gods on them. And basically, these are images of the undead. So it kind of looks like a vampire. And they are the ancestral spirits, the departed grandmothers and grandfathers who live with people. There's another one. You see, they're quite small. These are small household objects. The equivalent, and they represent particular members of the family who've passed on to the other world, but have become Ak. They've become the Aku. They've become the sort of undead. These creatures in a kind of intermediate state who are related to you. And there's another thing that's related to it as well, these very small steadily. Sorry, that's not coming out very well, I know, but which is also where you're kind of invoking the ancestral cunning spirits of your ancestors. Yes, like the Roman lares, someone said. It's a kind of similar. It's almost like everybody, wherever the high theologians say, this is the kind of popular religion, really. Your relatives stay with you, and that's been the belief since the beginning of time, really. I mean, the equivalent now would be a photograph, the photographs of your relatives, which you might have on the mantelpiece. And, you know, all right, maybe you don't do much with them, but potentially they're there, aren't they? You could talk to them. If you adopt the Egyptian point of view, you'd actually would be talking to them. Not just talking to them, you'd be making offerings to them and moving around with them and asking them to do things for you, because they're effective spirits, they're cunning spirits. They can do things. Otherwise, you can make a kind of altar. I've got an altar in the back garden. Little brick thing, and I suppose most of the household pets have been buried near there. So household pets are kind of also fit within this mindset. They become Aku as well. They become ancestral spirits that live with you. And most of the time, they can be troublesome. They can be troublesome if they're ignored, and they can be troublesome if you move houses and into someone else's, with the interaction between them and the other spirits. But this is quite a kind of complex relationship that I'm not going to... I go into in some detail a bit more in the book. But you get the idea of how this is the kind of inner workings of magic, really, of the mindset that we're kind of working with. So that's the act. So you can see it's a power, but it's also a thing. It's also an entity, a thought form of some sort. And then that would lead us to the other loose end we had from last time, which is to do with statues. Which again, essentially those little images I showed you of the act, they're little statues, aren't they? They're small statues. Sometimes the small statues you find in an Egyptian museum are the ones that have the most interesting function. They're not the big kind of power statements. They're kind of much more bit of magical technology, really, for tuning into spirits and for manipulating that power, or for drawing upon that power. And as I say, Heka, which is about the making of images, the making of perpetuation of doubles in a way, is very much, I mean, really this is one small section of a huge discipline to do with the construction of statues. Or images. Fetish might be a better term for this. Because they're not just objects, they've been given the breath of life. These are living entities, really. They're not just samples of some class of things. These are actual pieces of technology that you have to be quite careful with, in a way. Once you adopt the mindset and you start feeding these things. So I don't want to repeat that again. I kind of think if you listen to the first one again, you can go back and remind yourself what I said about, or what my ideas, which you might have some of you, about image magic and magic of giving breath to statues and assemblages. Quite complicated process. They're not just sort of. I'm trying to make something at the moment, right? And because it's the month of Osiris, I never quite finish it in the month. I made a good start this time, so I'm going to try and make maybe by next year, make this quite complicated statue image, magical statue, following as far as I can Egyptian instructions. So I'll let you know how that goes. But I have actually made a start. I've made the box, and I've got to make a mould, and then to take the substances that have got to go in the mould. But I have got two of these things on the go at the moment. Right, one of them is easier than the other. Okay, so just to finish, then I've talked about the act and extension, the different aspects of statues and image magic, and how this is the core of, as I see it, of Egyptian magic, and it really does connect us with the Sethian tradition as well. And I just wanted to go back to the notion of a bigger image, if you like. Let's say we're learning about the origins of magic. That's part of what I'm talking about. I'm learning about the origins of magic. The whole magical community is kind of learning, really, at the moment. It's learning loads of stuff. And we're improving. we're getting as we get closer to the Egyptian techniques, and we try and reconstruct them and reimagine them. I think our magic is getting better. I don't know if it's going to be ever as good. Oh, who knows? Some people think we're better than they are already. Well, that's controversial. You're supposed to think that. But we're certainly trying to recreate the mindset, and if we do some of the same things, then we kind of almost be like them. And we've had them, obviously Egyptian religion and pagan religion has this big gap between the ancient world and kind of whenever you say now, or the Renaissance or whatever. He had at least 1,000 years when it seemed to be in the West anyway, and there was another religion, really, as we know, and there were other religious ways of looking at things. Um, and I wanted to say, well, the Egyptians kind of knew. It's funny, they knew really that this was going to happen. They could see it coming. Um, and so they left a kind of prophecy, an image, a prophecy about images. They said um, that the temple itself is an image, and usually the entire world or cosmos is inhabited by those who made the temple. So there's a well-known text that we kind of should be reading that's got SETI and stuff as well, but even if you're just interested in general magic, which is called the Corpus Hermeticum, which is well, I talked about the PGM. The Corpus Hermeticum is the kind of theoretical aspect to this. It has very interesting origins, and it was compiled before the end, before the kind of other shoe fell, as they say. When people saw that the end was coming, they thought they better write down what it is that we've kind of learned over the last 10,000 years, because it's all going to get burned. Because the new religion, which became known as Christianity, it was going to be very hostile to other religions in its day, especially Egypt. It's very, very hostile to Egypt, which it came to view as its enemy. So the writing was on the wall at the time for paganism, but the prophets could see their own end, and they wrote it into this book called the Corpus Hermeticum. So I'll just lead you with a bit of that. As you know, that it's from a Latin text called the Asclepius, which is a holy book of Hermes Trismegistos, addressed to Asclepius. Mainly theory, as I say, but there is even a little bit of magic in that. And funny enough, the only magic or stuff that you'll find in Corpus Hermetica concerns images and image magic and statues. O Asclepius, dost thou not see how thou even doubtest that statues, ensouled with sense and filled with spirit, which work such mighty and such strange results, statues which can foresee what is to come and which perchance can prophesy, can foretell things by dreams and by other ways, statues that take their strength away from men or cure their sorrow if they so deserve it. Dost thou not know, Asclepius, that Egypt is the image of heaven? This land of ours is the shrine or temple of the whole world. But then the famous prophecy that comes after this, of the fall of paganism, a time will come when Egypt will appear to have in vain served the gods with its pious mind and constant worship, and all its holy cult will fall to nothing and be in vain. For that divinity is now about to hasten back from earth to heaven. It's about to leave the earth, and Egypt shall be left, and the earth, which was the seat of all its pious cults, shall be bereft and widowed. And foreigners shall fill this region and this land, and they shall not only neglect the pious cults, but still more painful, as though enacted by laws, a penalty shall be decreed against the practice and worship of the gods. Then shall this holiest of all lands, seat of our shrines and temples, be choked with tombs and corpses. O Egypt, Egypt, of thy pious cults, tales only will remain as far beyond belief as thine own sons. Words only will be left cut on thy stones. Thy pious deeds will be as nothing. And the company of gods shall mount again to heaven and forsake the worshippers, who will all die out. Egypt will be bereft and abandoned. But then God will recall the cosmos to its ancient form, so that the earth itself shall become ready again to be worshipped and admired, and God, the maker and restorer of so vast a work, be sung by humanity, who shall then with ceaseless praise and hymns of blessing greet him. And they who rule the earth shall be distributed to all lands, and they shall be founded towards the west, and to which all mortal race shall speed. And Egypt will rise again. Egypt will rise again.